Thank you for joining the second part of this training on Quality First Teaching for Teaching Assistants, delivered by the Standards and Effectiveness team at West Sussex County Council. As we said in the first session, this training is intended for teaching assistants, learning support assistants, or any other adult who's working to support a teacher with children's learning. As we recommended in session 1, it could be helpful as we go to write down new learning, any questions that you have or you may need to ask once the training is finished, and any actions you need to take to ensure this training has an impact on the young people you work with. So if you need to pause the video to grab something to write on, please do. The aims for this training session are to revisit the key messages you learnt from session 1, to explore different models of teaching assistant support and consider the pros and cons of each, to share some top tips for applying the Quality First teaching building blocks as a teaching assistant, whether you're working in a class or with a small group by yourself, and also to reflect on learning from both sessions and to consider the next steps, including further reading and information.
In this section, I will take you through the role of the TA in Quality First teaching. We will revisit the common building blocks of QFT and the role that the TA plays in this. We will also look at different models of TA support, as well as some recommendations from the Education Endowment Foundation for making the best use of TAs. In session 1, we covered the common building blocks of Quality First teaching. How many do you remember? Pause the video and write them down on a piece of paper. It's now time to see how many you have remembered. But before we do that, let's take a look at the 3 common building blocks that underpin the very concept of Quality First teaching. We believe that these values form the basis of QFT. Creating a culture of ambition for our pupils, promoting inclusivity, and fostering positive relationships. The other common building blocks include the following: adaptation of resources so that our pupils can access their learning, ensuring appropriate challenge is given to stretch our pupils, checking for misunderstanding and addressing misconceptions, chunking, breaking down complex tasks into smaller pieces so it is easier to remember. Dual coding. Now this refers to the process of combining visuals, i.e. image-based, and verbal or language-based elements to convey information or to explain a concept. Effective questioning. This assesses understanding and encourages deeper thinking. Giving explicit and simple instructions and also fostering independence amongst our learners. Other common building blocks include the use of manipulatives to help build a strong foundation for more complex tasks and also to engage pupils with their learning. Modeling. This is to demonstrate how to complete a task, giving clear aims and objectives for the lesson that enable pupils to achieve. Pre-teaching. This is to prepare our pupils for the next steps of their learning. Retrieval practice. This is reviewing material which was recently learned. Scaffolding. To support pupils in accessing their learning, attempting tasks with a view to becoming independent. Sequencing. This will allow our pupils to better understand a roadmap of their learning journey. The explicit use of vocabulary. As we know, vocabulary are words that allow children to understand new and linked concepts and to communicate their learning. By explicit use, we mean the vocabulary is stated clearly and in detail, leaving no room for confusion or doubt. We will now revisit the role of a teaching assistant. This was explored in session 1. The primary role of the teaching assistant should be to work with teachers to raise the learning and attainment of pupils, whilst also promoting their independence, their self-esteem, and social inclusion. They give assistance to pupils so that they can access the curriculum, participate in learning, and experience a sense of achievement. Having covered the role of a TA, we will now explore the different models associated with TA support. First, we have the Velcro approach, then we have the helicopter approach, and last but not least, the bridge builder approach. On this slide, I will explain the different models of TA support that we touched on earlier. The Velcro approach. For this approach, the TA spends a considerable amount of time with the pupil. As a result of this, pupils can feel secure knowing that there will always be an adult present to support them with their learning. However, there may be instances where the pupil can become dependent on the assistance of an adult before they actually attempt a task. This can sometimes result in a learned helplessness on the part of the pupil. For the helicopter approach, the TA starts the pupil off with an activity, then moves away, works with others, returning to refocus their child, to check in and help with any problems. They can then move away again and return in as and when they are needed. This approach also allows other pupils to benefit from the TA's support. The third approach, the bridge builder, allows the pupil to gain confidence to attempt tasks independently. The TA acts as a resource for the pupil, and they can access support depending on the level of challenge that the task presents. The model on this slide highlights how TAs can demonstrate scaffolding while supporting a pupil's learning. This can be achieved in different ways: by correcting a pupil where necessary, by giving clues, by prompting, and then modeling how to complete a task. This support happens at different levels and it is dependent on the need of the child at the time. It is important to remember that pupils may initially need more support, then gradually less support. An example of this is with handwriting. Initially, the TA models this to the pupil by providing tracing sheets with guidelines. The pupil is shown how to use the tracing sheet, and the TA provides a verbal commentary. Next, the pupil attempts to use the tracing sheet without help and without modeling, and less verbal commentary. At the final stage, the pupil can now write independently. We will end this section on the role of TAs in Quality First Teaching with some recommendations from the EEF and their document, Making Best Use of Teaching Assistants. Recommendation 3. Use TAs to help pupils develop independent learning skills and manage their own learning. And recommendation 7. Ensure explicit connections are made between learning from everyday classroom teaching and structured interventions. If you would like to read this document, I will include the link at the end of the presentation.
Now, before the session even begins, those delivering the session or supporting pupils in it must be really clear what the learning intentions or objectives are for that particular activity or lesson. This would usually be explicitly stated in short or medium-term planning documents such as lesson plans. Every activity should then have clear, precise learning intentions or objectives which are shared with everyone in the room, most importantly, the children themselves. You can then support the children with the intended learning itself, rather than focus on task completion. Now, this is true right from the start of a child's formal schooling. For example, in early years, children may be asked to make a card to celebrate a festival by cutting out shapes and gluing them on. Now, in this case, the likely learning is about using a pair of scissors correctly or developing improved motor control, not really about producing the card itself. Likewise, in secondary school, a practical science lesson should have a clear learning intention and not simply be about completing an experiment to collect a set of results. These learning objectives or intentions may be displayed on a whiteboard, a screen, printed on worksheets, or in exercise books or knowledge organisers. What's important is that everyone knows what they are or where they can find them if they don't. So, what are our top tips for teaching assistants to ensure this building block of quality first teaching is secure? Well, firstly, we advise that you look to see where the learning objectives or intentions are shown in each lesson. If you're leading an activity yourself, you need to make sure you're clear what the learning is and that this is communicated clearly to the children too. If you're unsure of what the learning intention or objective is, then do ask the teacher who is responsible for the learning in that session. Write down learning intentions if it's appropriate and if they need you to, or discuss them explicitly with any children you're working with. Remind children of these learning intentions during your interactions, not just at the start of a lesson, but throughout, and particularly at the end of the lesson, as hopefully this will help them see that they've made progress. Focus your support in the lessons to help children meet these learning objectives, rather than simply helping them to complete the task. The next building block we will consider is the explicit use of vocabulary. By explicit use, we mean the vocabulary is stated clearly and in detail, leaving no room for confusion or doubt. It's likely that every single lesson will build on children's existing vocabulary, words that they already know the meaning of or think they do, and can draw on verbally or in writing. It's very likely that each lesson will also introduce important new words as well as extending children's vocabulary. The more developed a child's vocabulary, the more likely they are to understand and link concepts and be able to communicate their learning clearly, effectively, and appropriately. And because new words are unfamiliar, they need to be taught explicitly, clearly, and in detail, leaving no room for confusion or doubt, and then repeated frequently and revisited so the brain realizes they're important and must be remembered. This links with retrieval practice and spaced learning. So, what are our top tips for teaching assistants for the explicit use of vocabulary? Well, firstly, we would always advise you to look and listen to see where important words are introduced in each lesson, or consider what words are really important in any session you may be delivering by yourself. Often teachers will signpost these, for example, writing them on a working wall or on a whiteboard so they're available for all to see. You may also want to write these words down, not only for yourself, but also for children you may be working with. In some schools, white, clean, laminated word bank cards like the one shown in the picture are used to record words in each session. They can then be erased before the next session. Try to remind children of these words in your interactions. Don't let them off and allow them to use a less appropriate word, but instead remain with your high expectations and clue them if needed to help them recall or find the words themselves. You can also ask children if they know similar words or the same word which is used in a different way. This helps children link that understanding, which helps them build a schema, and so information is more likely to be retained and understood. So, for example, the Normans invaded England in 1066, grey squirrels are an invasive species, and netball is an invasion game in PE. All these examples use a similar word meaning, but in different contexts. You might also deconstruct any word if it may help their understanding. For example, if the word submarine is used in a story, deconstructing this into sub, meaning under, and marine, meaning the sea, might help children understand that a submarine is a vessel that operates under the surface of the sea. Likewise, in Key Stage 3 science, the word photosynthesis can be separated into photos, the Greek word for light, and synthesis, which means to make. This helps children understand that photosynthesis is the process where chlorophyll in plants uses light to make sugars. And finally, don't forget to model saying the word correctly and ask the child to join in or repeat the word back to you. Now, remember, some support may be available to all children, though not all will need to use it. These are what we call universal adaptations. There are many examples which may include working walls, where important vocabulary or knowledge is kept visible and then grows over the course of several lessons, allowing children to draw on it when needed. Charts, for example, the periodic table is shown on the right, used in secondary schools, and again it remains visible so it can be accessed at any time. Word banks or word lists, and these are particularly useful when dual coded with visual pictures or symbols like the one you see. Number lines or manipulatives. Manipulatives are physical tools of teaching. They engage students visually and physically and include things such as numicon blocks, counters, and so on. These may be available to all children to access at will, or available in some zones of a classroom where grouping is flexible. We've also got writing frames to provide structure for writing tasks, and visual or knowledge organisers, which give a summary of the key facts and essential knowledge that pupils need about a unit of work or a curriculum subject. So what are our top tips for teaching assistants in the use of universal adaptations in the classroom or in small groups? Well, firstly, know what universal adaptations are available in each session. Some may be available every lesson, whereas others may be provided to support children with a specific learning intention. Remember, always talk to the teacher if you're unsure what adaptations are available. Ask the children who need help, what could you use in the room to help you? If they're unsure, you could give them some options to choose from. This begins to build independence and increases the likelihood that they'll be able to access these universal adaptations themselves next time without asking an adult. And finally, simply providing the resource does not mean children know how to use it. So always check children know where the resources are and how to use them correctly. Now, questioning really is one of the most important activities that any adults will do with a child during a teaching session. Asking serves a wide range of purposes, including assessing understanding, so you know where the children's learning is at that particular moment, encouraging deeper thinking and problem solving, stretching children further than they can do independently, developing children's oracy skills, requiring them to answer your questions and answer them fully if possible, develops oral communication skills that are vital in other aspects of a child's life. It encourages active participation. Remember, 100% participation is one of the core principles of quality first teaching, and asking targeted questions helps keep them on their toes. Questioning improves recall and reinforced knowledge. Requiring children to be able to answer certain questions shows that this knowledge is important and tells the child's brain that this should be retained into the long-term memory. Questioning can also help develop discussion to allow children to hear differing opinions and encourage active listening, respectful listening, and turn-taking. It can also guide children towards the intended learning, because it's essential that, having determined really clear and ambitious learning intentions, children leave at the end of the lesson having made good progress towards them. So, what are our top tips for teaching assistants for effective questioning? Well, firstly, only ask one question at a time. Remember, everyone's working memory can only hold 3 or 4 items at once, and if it's a challenging question, then one question is certainly enough. Think about your question. Should it be open or closed? We'll talk a little more about this in a minute, but closed questions often have a definite answer, whereas open questions may lead to further discussion because the answer is less precise. Try to include thinking time up to 10 seconds. Too often adults are impatient and expect an answer from a child almost immediately without any time for them to think about it. So try counting silently in your head up to 10 if a child is thinking. And this gives them a good amount of time to form an answer, and you might be pleasantly surprised by what they eventually say. If needed, consider cluing rather than giving the final answer. If a child's struggling with an answer, try to give them a clue or signpost a resource that might be useful in finding the answer rather than giving them the answer immediately. And build on prior knowledge by asking what you already know that might be helpful. This is a metacognitive skill that helps children to become more independent and realise they often have existing knowledge that could be helpful. And focus questions particularly on the learning objective and that key vocabulary. Once again, we need to be mindful of the intended learning in the lesson and the key vocabulary we're developing. Answering some questions reinforces these, and that's therefore essential. Now, this questioning grid can be used to prompt discussion in one-to-one and in groups. Sometimes it can be helpful to use a structure as it becomes known to the pupils, and that will help them to progress and reduce anxiety about what they might be asked. This grid moves from lower order question, which are closed questions, towards higher order open questions, which can be more effective. You might like to pause for a moment and think about a recent interaction with a pupil or with a group of pupils and consider how you developed questioning, or if your questions could have been adjusted to be even more open. Let's now take a look at two connected building blocks of quality first teaching: scaffolding and chunking. In this case, scaffolding is a metaphor for a temporary support that is removed when no longer required. It may be visual, verbal, or written. It's important to note that scaffolding should provide just enough support to allow pupils to successfully complete a task that they would otherwise not be able to do independently. This just enough principle is really important to avoid learnt dependency. Chunking tasks or information into smaller pieces can be a form of scaffolding in itself. This is important because it reduces the cognitive load on the working memory. If you recall, the working memory is very limited and so can only hold a few pieces of information at a time. Chunking these into smaller pieces and considering a few at a time can help children. Scaffolds must be removed as soon as the child is ready to build their independence. Adults should always be considering the minimum amount of support that is required and encourage children to move away from scaffolds towards independent work wherever possible. So what are our top tips for teaching assistants for use of scaffolding and chunking in teaching sessions? Well, consider these examples that you might be familiar with. Sentence starters to help children begin talking or writing. Word banks of relevant vocabulary. Task plans like the one you see on the right, which lays out what a child needs to complete a task, what they need to do, and the time they have to complete it. These can be laminated on A4 paper and completed using a dry white marker so that they can be reused with children every lesson. Writing frames and cartoon strips, again these provide structure and chunk the tasks into smaller pieces. Graphic organisers, tools that visually display information, making it easier for learners to understand complex ideas, for example concept or mind maps. Concrete resources or realia and visuals to help make the learning visible, as discussed earlier when we were considering manipulatives. Use of first language if they have English as an additional language. Some children may need to start work in their first language to access a task. This would be alongside a program of additional support to develop their English to a level where they can then access and show learning without the need to use their first language. Modelling examples, for example, I do, we do, you do. Adults modelling how to complete a task and explaining their thinking out loud is incredibly powerful as a scaffolding tool, and that's used in many classrooms. The I do, we do, then you do approach shows how the scaffold is gradually removed over the course of a lesson, building towards independence and doing so in small steps. We also have visual prompts, cues, hints. For example, asking, what have you done before that will help you with this? Or don't forget, your work needs to include. And finally, paired and group work. Remember, additional support should not always come from an adult, and the children being supported by and supporting their peers can be another really important scaffold where appropriate. This framework, published by the EEF, aims to show what scaffolding might look like for TA's work with pupils. It offers examples to demonstrate how scaffolds can be used to gradually increase pupils' independence over time. The link to this document and others is included in the further reading section of the presentation, so you can download your own copy if you wish.
It's now time to summarize everything that you've learned today and explore what your next steps may be once you have completed the training. It is now time for us to summarize the key messages from this training session. Firstly, quality first teaching helps all children, not only those with SEND. Remember to revisit the different models of TA support: Velcro, helicopter, and bridge builder. We need to be mindful that where we need to support our pupils with their work, we also need to ensure that we are promoting independence by following the steps outlined in these models. I'm sure you will remember that QFT has some common building blocks which are shown below. Please refer to slide 7 for a full explanation of each of these building blocks. Also, the EEF's recommendations on the best use of teaching assistants in schools. Please see more helpful tips below that will summarize key learning from this session. Every activity must have clear, precise learning intentions or objectives. Focus your support to help children meet these objectives rather than simply completing the task. New words need to be taught explicitly, repeated frequently, and revisited to be learned. Know what universal adaptations are available in each session, and check children know where resources are and how to use them correctly. It is more powerful to ask a single open question and then allow thinking time. Clue, rather than giving an answer straight away. Scaffolds provide just enough support so that pupils can successfully complete tasks. They should be removed as soon as the child is ready to build their independence. Here's what we suggest your next steps might be as you have now completed the final session of this training course. Firstly, set some time aside to review your notes and ask questions you may have to an appropriate member of staff in your school. For example, a line manager or the senior leader with responsibility for teaching and learning. Look at the further reading and other resources that are included right at the end of this presentation. This includes the documents we refer to, but also other resources, such as video clips that you might find helpful. As we've learned from the forgetting curve that we covered in session 1, leaving it too long will make it harder to remember what we have covered. Finally, when you're back in class, try to spot any of the building blocks that we've talked about being used in the lesson. Please download the leaflet at the end of this presentation and feel free to use this guide while supporting pupils in your school. Thank you. We really appreciate you taking the time to complete the QFT for Teaching Assistants training. Please remember to download the leaflet, which is full of handy hints and tips of how best to support your pupils using the building blocks of quality first teaching.